Now there's a reason why we would expect scandals to get heavy rotation. It's because they're sexy. Barnum effect. You get what I mean? Now, of course, when I talk about these stories being sexy now, I think it's no longer just a metaphor. Why? Yeah, in the age of the doll, they typically are about sex. Yeah, they are about sex. But yeah, scandals tend to get heavy play. Now you'll notice that scandals do not hit directly at the core of our institutional system. What do they hit at? They hit at particular politicians rather than at the system itself. And they also tend not to be what I would call substantive criticisms of the system. They also tend to get higher ratings for Barnum effect reasons. This is one of the reasons why scandal mongering when it comes to government is typically fair game. Now you'll notice that, and granted I'm going out on a limb here a little bit, you'll notice what false impression all this scandal mongering gives to the public. It gives them the false impression that the mass media is hard-hitting, even if it's not truly hard-hitting. And it also oftentimes gives people the false impression of what? I'll write it down. It gives people the false impression of bias. Because all the person has to see is this. My Republican is being picked on, the liberal media, the liberal media. Or, if it's the media picking on a Democrat, they'll say, see, the damn conservatives are at it again. In other words, people will fail to see what? They will fail to see the big picture. What they will see is this sort of adversarial Dems versus Republicans thing. And you've probably seen the demographics on this. If you poll people who are dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, they think that the media is so far left to be socialist. You've seen the statistics, right? And guess what? Most people who are consistent Democratic voters think that the media leans right-wing. They both can't be what? They both can't be correct. In other words, those studies, people's belief that the media are biased in a particular way say nothing about if the media were biased a particular way. It says what people think about bias. And I hope you don't mind this rudeness. People tend to be pretty stupid when it comes to these things. In other words, if the media seems to be beating up on their guys, they will get the impression that there's a bias. Simply because the media seems to be beating up on their guys. And guess what? We are selective about what we see. In other words, you say, oh, the media attacking Trump. Well, guess what? At this point, I mean, he's had one of the most scandalous presidencies, probably since Harding. And that's saying something. He's probably had one of the most currently scandalous administrations since Harding. And that was considered to be the what? The most corrupt administration in U.S. history. But yeah, simply because they're covering all of the scandals, and I would actually say they're not actually covering the real scandals. You know, they're covering the Stormy Daniels scandals and things of that nature, as opposed to the real travesties. Now, of course, if they did cover the real travesties, it would probably hit at the core of what? The corruption that is at the core and endemic to our system, no matter what. No matter if it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. Now, you'll notice those kind of scandals are not the things that are likely to be discussed. And this is because it might actually shape the American people's what? Oh, the faith in the system. The faith in the system, that the system is actually essentially a good one and not in need of serious repair. But yeah, those kind of more scandalous things are typically not talked about. Now, of course, the perpetual war machine is also something that's not talked about. Why is that? Well, because we never make war, we make peace. You know, that's one of the reasons why. It's part of our impression about ourselves. But keep in mind, if the perpetual war spending were not going on, a lot of business interests would not be very happy. And if you'll pardon my mild interjection here, because the media has been taught not to play referee, how many of you know what I'm talking about? Traditional media has been trained not to play referee. What do I mean by play referee?
Calling BS.
Yeah, calling bullshit bullshit. Because if you call out bullshit, people will cry bias. And granted, this has been documented. This actually goes back to Nixon. By the way, Nixon is before all your time. He's not before my time. Except I was a little youngster at the time of Nixon. But Nixon had a number of scandals. But his claim was, he goes, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not a crook. It's the liberal media that is out to get me. How many of you heard that? He made the claim, the liberal media is out to get me. Well, guess what? That claim, true or not, ended up sticking. And people have been making the liberal media claim ever since then. Even if nobody clearly defines what a liberal media would mean, and so forth, all you have to do is say, the media are biased against me, therefore fake news. Donald Trump merely put the cherry on the top of the whipped cream. In other words, what he's doing is really nothing what? It's really nothing new. It's just the old stuff on steroids, is how I would put it. Enough bad analogies, enough bad metaphors and cliches. In other words, what we're seeing right now isn't entirely new. But all you have to do is say the media are biased, and it has this effect on the media, a toxic effect on the media, that the media will not call out BS as BS. When in fact, some of us think that the job of the media shouldn't be just to spew factoids out there. Some of us think the job of the media should be to do something like they do on Frontline. In other words, to provide nuanced accounts that would include what? And this is the biggest thing. Nuanced accounts that would provide context. In other words, when you hear something or other going on with a foreign country, some kind of conflict going on between the U.S. and a foreign country, and the media just reports such and such conflict is occurring, how can the average Joe six-pack know what to make of that factoid unless she has what? Some kind of deeper understanding. Some kind of understanding that these factoids don't occur in a vacuum. You know, why all of a sudden are we out to destroy Venezuela, for example? That was one of the things back when. Or why is it that we have had these ongoing tensions with Iran? Well, guess what? If the media would talk about the fact that we have had a long checkered history with Iran, the average Joe six-pack wouldn't just think they're a bunch of crazy mullahs who want to bomb us. You get the idea? In other words, we would understand that maybe people who the U.S. has what? Kicked around, put down, stepped on, may actually have a good reason for what? For perhaps not liking us. And by the way, they will always say it's not the American people we don't like. It's the what? It's the U.S. government basically always telling what? Believing it can tell everyone else what it ought to do, even to the point of if we don't like their what? You've heard this before, right? If we don't like their government, we will stage a coup to overthrow it. Yeah. And by the way, this is what happened with Iran in the 1950s. They democratically elected a leader. He won and the funny thing is we portray these countries as if they don't have democracies, but guess what? Many of the countries we call undemocratic have oftentimes been more democratic than us in terms of political processes. But we didn't like something that Mohammad Mossadegh proposed, and that was called the nationalization of the oil fields. US and British companies were not happy about this, so they staged a coup. It was called, what do they call it? It was called the best coup that money could buy. Because of course it was all staged. People were paid to participate in the coup, and it all ended up where? It all ended up on the news. And it looked like it was a popular resistance against Mossadegh, when in fact it what? It was wag the dog, man. It was completely staged. But keep in mind, what do pictures tell? Thousands of wrong words in a lot of cases. They sometimes tell the opposite story, an Orwellian story. But yeah, if there were context provided, those factoids could actually be put into some kind of a skeleton. And we could understand why certain things were important to cover and certain things not. Now, because I'm almost running out of time, we'll spend time talking about this next time. I want to say a couple of remarks. Some of you who, and I'm not being a jerk about this, please know this, because remember, I wanted to know what people think and so forth. And we're here to discuss these things, learn about these things. A lot of times people say, our local news, you can tell they're biased. I'm like, well, wait a minute. As a matter of fact, I don't see much bias at all in our local news. Because if you actually watch a half-hour news segment on our local news, what is the majority of it likely to cover? Any takers? This will be on the test, by the way. The traffic report, the weather. How the hell controversial is the weather? In other words, most of what is in your local news is actually not controversial at all. As a matter of fact, there's very little national political news in a 30-minute news hole on your local news broadcast. And if there is any local or any national news coverage, it's usually fairly saccharine when it comes to things, flavorless. It's usually just a bunch of factoids, like so-and-so did such and such, or so-and-so said such and such, or the government passed this bill, whatever. In other words, fairly, tepid kind of stuff. And it also, the other thing, sports. Seriously, think about how much sports coverage you get on your local news. As a matter of fact, I would say weather, traffic reports, and sports are about half the news hole right there. Yeah, Smith. Oh yeah. And this, by the way, this will show up again. Yeah, Mr. Smith's got it exactly right. You're likely to get a bunch of celebrity gossip kind of stuff on the news. And of course, most of us would say, this isn't actually news. But it turns out that from a profit standpoint, it certainly is news. I mean, I don't care what, was it Ben Affleck and what's her face? Was Jennifer Garner and Ben Affleck. I don't know why I don't like Affleck. I just think he looks smug. But yeah, I would probably agree with most of his politics, and we probably wouldn't disagree on that stuff. You sometimes just don't like people. Does that make sense? But anyway, they're likely to cover a story about, some kind of celebrity breakup or so, and so forth. And of course, does this get viewers? Yeah, because people like that kind of crap. It's schadenfreude. We feel good when, the rich and famous fall down. I do. I admit it, right? I like to see that their lives are as bad as ours. That kind of thing. It makes me feel good. But yeah, it's also cheap and easy to cover. And in many circumstances, and then I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, but in many circumstances, also keep this in mind. A lot of the kinds of celebrity news that they cover oftentimes has a positive benefit for the media institutions. Any takers? McChesney doesn't talk about this in his digital disconnect, but he does talk about it elsewhere, and it's also in our chapter. My wife watches the Today Show on News 8. Very frequently, they talk about a movie that's going to be released, and they'll spend 5 minutes talking about the movie release. 9 out of 10 times, it is a movie that was produced by Universal Studios. And now at least they say it. They didn't used to say. At the end, they will say, our sister company, Universal Studios. In other words, part of their quote-unquote news magazine will be cross-promotion. So in other words, they can fill the news hall with basically a what? An ad. They can fill the news hall with an ad for some kind of product that their sister company is putting forth. Now technically, and I think I'll leave you with this, I actually don't think any of us should have to pay for cable. As a matter of fact, I think they should have to pay us. Why? Because we're basically, as McChesney put it, we are the product being sold to the advertisers. They should actually be paying us to watch the stuff rather than the other way around. Does that make sense? Why? Well, keep in mind, because when you view, they're selling to you.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's our choice whether we want to kind of check ourselves and fall into that or not, or stay away from it.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, they're trying to get us coerced. And if they were to give it to us for free, and in a sense, we're what they're...
We love it, or we wouldn't pay for it.
Yeah, well, you got a point. I said they ought to be, I mean, if there were any morality, they would be paying us. But yeah, if they can actually coerce us to want it and pay $130 a month for it, and basically be targeted for ads. Anyway, I'm almost out of time. I need a favor from you folks. Can someone do me a